Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, of course, delivering the best discussion, debate, and analysis each week as we bring you the betting lines and the perspective of Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info each and every Friday. You can catch us at 11:45 Eastern Time. That's on the live stream, or, of course, it gets posted to Mark Rogers TV at YouTube, and you can check it out. It's one of my most enjoyable conversations of the week because I learn something each and every time. Steve, how you doing today?
Hey, Mark, doing well. Great to be back.
Steve, there's something wrong here. For the second consecutive week, I lose an NFL game on Thursday night by 0.5 point.
Yeah, well, I mean, these Thursday nighters, well, actually, that line was pretty much 7 steady. So who did you have in that one?
Oh, 6.5 Minnesota. That was just in an office pool. So the lines for them are a bit kind of set in stone on Monday. And there you go. There you have it.
Yeah, I had the Vikings +7 as a TV opinion for my clients. It was pretty much +7 across the board. There was actually a few spots yesterday on Thursday afternoon that had +7.5 with some extra juice. So yeah, I didn't see any 6.5s as of actual game day. So not only did you lose by 0.5 point, but it's even worse because you actually had a bad number. So that probably makes it even worse. But yeah, I'd call that game a push overall.
All right. And we also had Miami steamrolling against North Carolina. What was your play on that? Did you have any strong opinion on that one? I took Miami to roll.
Yeah, I actually had a TV opinion on Miami as well. Those are the two football opinions I had last night on Thursday. What's funny about that game is I had both of those teams last week as best bets on Saturday. Miami did not get it done as the big favorite, laying 26, but the Tar Heels did get it done, winning outright as a 3-point home dog. So I thought it was a good letdown spot for North Carolina, and we don't see that angle a lot in college football, but I talk about it with these NFL games, how it continues to be difficult for the road teams on the short week. Vikings losing last night, by the way, makes the home teams a perfect 4-0 straight up now in the NFL on Thursday nights this year. And yeah, I thought that was a good spot for Miami of Florida. I'd liked UNC last week, did not like them this week, and that's just how you handicap. You know, you don't necessarily like teams all season long. It's more situational analysis and spot plays. And textbook example, within a 5-day period, I had two winners going on and against the same team.
Yeah, I had a similar opinion of Stanford, Oregon last week, where I kept telling people that weren't happy with my Oregon pick straight up, and of course against the spread, is that I believe Stanford's a better team week to week over the course of a season in 12 weeks. But I was looking at Oregon winning on a particular Saturday night. But of course, they made some bad plays down the stretch, and that probably really drove some people. So there was a collection to the point, Steve, last week where I actually on Monday cut a bad beats video. And I'd never done that before because I got burned so many times last week. Oregon straight up, I selected, plus the 2.5. I took that as well. Let's see. We had on Friday night, I'm skipping around, Illinois. As you track these games just about as good as anyone, despite the final score being blown out of the water. Of course, they had a 24-21 lead as a 27.5 point underdog in the third quarter. 3-point lead. They blow that as expected, but Penn State's trying to get on the bus with about 3 minutes left, just running the ball back and forth. They get to a 3rd and 18. There's an unnecessary roughing on Illinois that extends the game. They're down by 25 and gives Penn State the ball back. They score. There goes my 27.5. And Ohio State scores with 30 seconds left. I had Tulane plus the 38.5 there. Ohio State's scores to extend it to 49-6, and Alabama gives up a late touchdown where I had the Tide covering 26. So it probably just all came into play for me last week.
Yeah, and if you think about it, you know, we talk about 6-point teasers where you can move the line 6 points in the NFL or college football, and you have to win both plays. It's basically like one bet, but you have to win both. And the reason is because normally that's 6 points. 70% of the time, games are going to land within the 6 points. So that's how much of an edge it is moving a line 6 points, because the lines are that accurate, more so than they've ever been in history the last few years. So when you have 50+ college football games, you have 15+ NFL games, you're talking about 60 to 70 college and pro football games a week. And when every line, 70% of those lines are going to be within 6 points accurate, it doesn't take much, especially when college and pro football, you know, a 7-point score is more than that right there. So, yeah, statistically speaking, this should happen. People obviously notice it more when they're on those particular games. But, yeah, every week you can make bad beat videos. And, you know, we know ESPN gets a lot of views with that and stuff on Monday nights. It is a fun segment. And the way they play it up, it makes it look like everything is unbelievably, you know, crazy that this happened. But yeah, when you really look at the numbers, when you had 60, 70 football games and every 70% of those are going to be within a touchdown of the spread, it doesn't take much to cause bad beats. And then you factor in, Mark, not only sides, but totals, over-unders. So now you've got 140 possible plays as opposed to just 70 games. You've got 140 possible plays with those. Yeah, you're going to have 5-10 bad beats every week just by default.
Yeah, and the flip side is obviously there are people benefiting from those crazy situations at the end of the game. So we never talk about that.
Right, we need to do some good beat videos, right?
We tend to forget those of us that go the cup half empty, at least when it comes from a betting standpoint. Obviously, forget the 5 that we lucked into versus the bad beats. I know that you're often outlining some games that aren't necessarily on the national radar in regards to the top 10 teams or the big conferences. We've got Memphis and Tulane tonight. We've got UCLA and Colorado. I'm going to, of course, gravitate to the Power 5 game because that's what I cover more. And just to think about people talking about right now, UCLA not winning a game this year. And for as much as that was a tenuous situation going into the season for a number of reasons, and Chip Kelly obviously not getting to a point where he can be held accountable completely for this record going into the season, to think Colorado would be a roughly 9 or 10 point favorite against UCLA would have seemed unfathomable a month ago.
Yeah, well, how about this? Within the same couple of weeks, you got Army, the same size underdog at Oklahoma as UCLA, within only a week or so of each other. So that's really how far UCLA has fallen. Now, obviously, Army's an improved program, but still not on the same level. So yeah, there's a learning curve there. You would think Chip Kelly will turn things around sooner than later. He's proven he can win at the college level. He's proven he can win in this conference. With that said, though, I really need to see something on the field from UCLA first. This is a team that has not been competitive so far. They lose 38-14 last week at home against Fresno, and they were a home dog in that game even. Meanwhile, Colorado not really tested against New Hampshire last week, looked good against Nebraska on the road, but Nebraska is another team that has a new learning curve. Their win against Colorado State is probably the only impressive win they've had this season. So uncertainty with both teams here. It's enough for me to stay off this game, but teams like Nebraska, teams like UCLA with the new coaching staff, the new schemes, you really need to see them turn it around first. Florida State, another team like that, before you can start backing them with real money.
Got Steve Merrill on the line from Pro Sports Info. You can join him right there. It's prosportsinfo.com. Steve has joined us for a season and a half talking college football and into the NFL playoffs and Super Bowl. And it's one of my favorite segments of the week because I learn a ton and it's fascinating to me. I would think for the general public like myself, I'm a guy that's interested in it. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm miles away from being a professional, that I stay with what I know, which would be the Power 5. And then we start to mix it up with some of the better group of 5, and it's difficult to make score comparisons and even the numbers, the people that grind down the yards per play and those kind of numbers, difficult to compare. So when we take an early season standout team like a Buffalo, what are we doing with them at this standpoint? Because they whipped up on Rutgers, but we could barely consider them a Power 5 team the way they've played. And now they've got an interesting matchup against kind of a like team, although they're not grouped in the group of 5. They're a major independent in Army coming off their showing in Norman. That's an interesting one.
Yeah, and I mentioned that spread was actually less. The closing line was less than it was for UCLA. UCLA was over 30. Army closed at about a 28.5 point dog. It came down from 30, and the smart money was right in that one. They only lose by 7 points. They only throw 9 passes in the whole game. They run the ball 78 times. That's what Army does. So the key for Buffalo is, can they stop the run? They've been average against the run this year at best. So far this year, they have not really been tested. Against Rutgers last week, they held them to 116 rushing yards. But they don't have the bye week. They don't have the extra time off. So the concern here would be the letdown for Army. But, of all the teams that probably don't let down, it's a team like Army, a disciplined military academy. Every football Saturday is like a vacation for these guys, what they go through during the regular week on campus. And then on top of that, when you're running the ball, running the option every play, it's so systemized and mechanical that I don't think you have as many flat spots. So this looks like a decent spot for Army, and I think Buffalo could be exposed this week. Their run defense has been average at best, and they haven't faced anything like this option attack.
Before we continue through Saturday's play, Steve, if somebody checks out the website, they're interested in gaining your insight from a formal standpoint of getting the exact picks throughout Saturday and Sunday and the rest of the sports, what do they need to do?
Yeah, it's really simple. I mean, I only use games that have a mathematical edge. Everything is mathematical for me. It's been that way the past 22 years. If I'm using a game personally, my clients get it. I have one set of plays. Those are my personal best bets. Whether I have 3 games or 5 games, it doesn't matter. Whatever has an edge, we use. And when they sign up on the website, they get the exact same games I'm using. Prosportsinfo.com, prosportsinfo.com.
Syracuse Clemson would be one of those more emotional picks, or people would think that they're trying to play psychologist. Either Syracuse is starting to pull off these kind of games. Of course, they did one earlier this year against Florida State. We can make an argument against talent versus performance on the field for the Seminoles this year, that Syracuse beat a more talented team. But of course, the Seminoles a bit of a mess at this point. They come into Clemson. Of course, the road home situation with this year to year is completely different, going from the Carrier Dome, pulling off what they did on a Friday night versus going to Clemson noon game as a 25-point favorite. A lot of people buy into the Clemson's going to be angry, take out the revenge, versus Syracuse. Maybe they've got something working against Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, it always concerns me, Mark, when everybody is kind of looking at the same angle. And I do agree with you that revenge angle is pretty obvious in this one. And when you have a 3.5 touchdown favorite, yeah, you can have revenge but still win by 21 and be happy probably and not cover. This line did open at 21, so there has been money on Clemson. I think that's both public and sharp money. So this line has been climbing all week, and I understand why. I don't really think you can play Syracuse in this game. It is a dangerous spot because obviously Clemson is the better team and they will be focused. And when you have the better team in a focused spot like Clemson, it's very difficult to play against them. What you're going to be hoping for here if you play Syracuse is that they can hang within the number or maybe get the backdoor cover. And in general, I don't like taking that approach to handicapping. It's just too, random. Last year's game obviously was a flat spot for Clemson. It was a national TV weeknight game and also up in the dome, as you mentioned. Different thing now for Syracuse. And their only legitimate win has been Florida State. The only other game in which the point spread was in single digits was against Western Michigan in week 1, and they gave up 42 points in that game. They gave up over 600 yards of offense at Western Michigan. So I still think that Syracuse defense is very suspect. We know Clemson's defense is great, and I think Clemson could put up some big points in this game.
Steve Merrill, Pro Sports Info, joining us each and every Friday at 11:45 Eastern Time. And so that means you can join us for the live stream. Obviously, it's going to post to my YouTube channel, and you can catch it at a later date if you need to. Steve, it's an interesting time of year because what you have is you have a number of teams that performed. Maybe they had a lighter schedule and they beat the teams they were supposed to in September, non-conference, or maybe they pulled off a game that they shouldn't have or weren't expected to. Now we're starting conference play and everybody's focused on Ohio State, Penn State, and Stanford, Notre Dame, but there's a ton of very, very important conference games since the conference season is starting amongst teams that have maybe a chance that we didn't think had a chance to win a division championship or stick around a little bit longer than expected. One would be Duke, one would be Virginia in what could be a crazy Coastal Division race. So you got Virginia Tech. Obviously, we loved them after the week 1 showing, not so much after last week's historic loss as a 28-point favorite, going to Duke to take on a team that, again, is undefeated and usually underestimated.
Yeah, I think the hurricane played a big role in what happened to Virginia Tech last week. Old Dominion actually got their game in against Charlotte. They decided to play it earlier in the week. I think it was on a Thursday or so, and they went down to Charlotte, got it in before the hurricane hit. Meanwhile, East Carolina canceled their game with Virginia Tech. And you look at how these bye weeks early in the season affect teams. I've always felt like they're momentum breakers one way or the other. You take a contrarian approach. And what I mean by that is Virginia Tech had beaten Florida State. They'd blown out William & Mary. They didn't need the bye week. They were rolling. It obviously hurt them. They lose outright as a 28-point road favorite to an Old Dominion team that hadn't won all season. Meanwhile, you look at a team like South Carolina. They were coming off that tough Georgia loss, the big blowout loss. They got the week off because of the hurricane, and then they played well last week. So I think it helps a team like that. It hurt a team like Virginia Tech. So now the question becomes, how do they respond this week against a dangerous Duke squad? That was a terrible loss for them last week. This is a Virginia Tech team that had national title hopes. Granted, their win against Florida State's not quite as impressive after we saw what Syracuse did to Florida State and how they've played in general. Samford kept it close. But still, Virginia Tech was controlling their own destiny until that loss last week. Now they kind of probably know that their season is over from a national title perspective, and that can often leave a team flat for a few games. And when you're taking on a Duke team that's averaging 38 points a game, 6 yards per play, it's a dangerous opponent. So if Virginia Tech shows up, they might be the better team still, but I have very little confidence in them right now. And this is one of those games you have to be very careful with for that reason.
And staying in the ACC, a similar situation in which not a whole lot of people are paying attention to Virginia and North Carolina State, but the Cavaliers opened ACC play with a huge win against Louisville, a game that I did not have on my radar, was not going to pick because it's a not non-top 25 game. And I actually made the stupid comment to you, man, look at this line. It just jumped out to me. Louisville, sure, they got blown out by Alabama. That's a completely different league. And sure, they struggled against Western Kentucky, but they're starting the ACC play, and Virginia, they have struggled issues scoring. This has to be a close game. They're getting 5 points, and Virginia goes out there and waxes them. And now we've got North Carolina State, which would have been nice to have seen them play West Virginia and get that barometer of play. They have yet to play anyone, but it's an early season key, a matchup to see who might stay in a division race.
Yeah, and Virginia actually got their Hurricane Week game in because they moved it to Nashville. They played at Vanderbilt Stadium against Ohio a couple weeks ago, and it turned out Charlottesville didn't get hit at all. They could have played the game at home. And I thought it was unfortunate for Virginia, who was having a decent start to the season, to lose a home game like that. But it worked out. They won the game 45-31 as a 4-point neutral field favorite. Last week, I agreed with you. I didn't really touch the Louisville-Virginia game. It wasn't really on my radar either, but it did jump out to me as well, just to see them as a 4 to 5 point favorite over Louisville. It just looks strange, and they won the game easily, 27-3. So Virginia is improved this season with 3 wins already. They're a perfect 4-0 against the spread, by the way, and that's also a sign that they're maybe a little bit underrated. I still think this is a tough spot for them, though. Other than that neutral site against Ohio and the one road game in Indiana, which they lost by 4, they haven't really had a tough road game this season. You would think the situation favors NC State, but if you look at the numbers, statistically, Virginia's been solid this year, both running and throwing the ball, especially running the ball. They're averaging over 200 yards a game. The quarterback is very mobile, and that's something NC State's going to have to be ready for. And NC State's been very mediocre defensively this year, both against the run and the pass.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You help us tremendously if you like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and you get the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry, analysis from myself, and this weekly update from Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info. We go through the betting lines each and every Friday at 11:45 Eastern Time. That's live. Of course, you can catch it after it posts to YouTube. South Carolina, Kentucky. Kentucky's been the darlings, or maybe not so much, depending on your angle, of the early season underdogs. Double digits against Florida on the road. They break a historic losing streak, and then close to double digits against Mississippi State. Still maybe not getting the respect considering they're at home against South Carolina, and it's pretty much a pick'em game.
Yeah, when you have over 120 college football teams on the betting rotation each season, you're always going to have a few teams, statistically speaking, even just 1% of them, and you're going to have 1 or 2 teams that really fly under the radar, and they just continue to cover all season. We just mentioned Virginia being a perfect 4-0 against the numbers so far this year. Kentucky, surprisingly, is just 2-2 against the point spread so far this year. The 2 times they've won outright as a double-digit dog, they've obviously covered because they've won those games outright. But the other 2 times they've been a double-digit favorite, they've won, but they haven't covered. So they've been better point spread wise against tougher opponents, and this is a tough opponent in South Carolina. With that said, though, I still think they would have been a decent sized underdog when the season began in this game. Now they're a slight 1.5 point favorite. They've won several years in a row against South Carolina, so the Gamecocks will not overlook this game. And as I mentioned earlier, Mark, how the bye week, the Hurricane bye, hurt Virginia Tech. I think it helped South Carolina. They looked pretty good against Vanderbilt last week after the week off. And I still think this Gamecock squad is a better team overall. It'll be interesting to see how this one plays out. I haven't had a good read on Kentucky, obviously. I haven't really used them this year, but they have played better than expected. I just have historically seen when teams get ranked like this after not being ranked for a while, that sometimes that's the sell sign, at least in the near future, and to play against.
We have the different level of teams. It starts with Alabama at the top, Ohio State, Clemson, et cetera, on down the line that you can maybe trust week to week. Maybe they don't cover, but they're not going to go out there, save going to Kinnick Stadium in the middle of October and get blown out by 31 points. But other than that, they're pretty rock solid. Then at the bottom, you can almost start to trust the ineptitude of certain teams. And Rutgers has been that team this year. Are those... Trying to approach this question in regards to, do you start to depend on the reliability of either greatness or complete ineptitude?
I do a lot with the financial markets the same way I handicap college and pro sports. And as I mentioned earlier, for my clients, I use a mathematical approach. It's all about line value. people always ask me, who do you like in this matchup next week? And I go, depending what the line is. I might like either team, and then an absurd example, if you give me, 70 points with any college football team, I'm probably going to take it. It doesn't work that way. The lines are pretty accurate. But my point is, with the financial markets, when like a market is trending up or down, you don't try to catch a falling knife. It's an old adage. And it's the same thing in the betting markets with sports. When a team is struggling, like say Florida State, for example, or Nebraska, when there's or like UCLA we talked about earlier, you don't try to guess which week they're going to turn things around. You're just guessing. You need to see it first. And it usually takes several games, several weeks. And when a team is struggling like Rutgers, it's the same thing. Meanwhile, when a team is playing well like Kentucky or flying under the radar like Virginia, you have to, be cautious going against them. But especially with teams that are struggling, because it's very difficult when you have 19, 20-year-old kids to all of a sudden flip a switch and fix the problems within 1 week, 3 or 4 days of practice. So, yeah, a team like Rutgers right now I'd be very cautious with. And I really like to see something on the field, because keep in mind, when there's 50 games on the board Saturday, they've got to put odds on every one of those games, but you don't have to play every game. So if there's uncertainty, move on to something where there's a little more certainty.
Absolutely. And again, we've cautioned against this in previous episodes where we've talked about people just gravitate to huge games. Well, there's no betting advantage just because it's a big game, because it's important. There's obviously going to be more money, I would guess, on Ohio State, Penn State than any other college football game this weekend. But there's nothing magical about the game from a money standpoint.
Correct. And when I started 20-some years ago, I usually stayed away from the big games. I found more value in the late 1990s when they added the MAC to the betting rotation. Back when I started in the mid-90s, even the MAC conference wasn't on the regular betting rotation. But now all these games are in Division 1A, and they even put the FBS, FCS teams against each other. You'll find point spreads on those even. But when I first started handicapping the MAC games in the late 90s, I found great value because they were kind of flying under the radar. But then once again, once everything becomes mainstream, the odds become more accurate. And in recent years, I've actually found more value with the Power 5 teams that we talk about. And one of the reasons I do like the marquee games is because you don't have to worry about focus. You don't have to try to guess, will a team be ready to play this week? Are they going to overlook the opponent? Because we know both Ohio State and Penn State will be ready to play in this game. So what I like about it from a handicapping perspective is that you can kind of throw out that uncertainty and focus really on the matchups, the numbers, and how you think the game will play out, because there's less uncertainty on the mental state of each team.
So speaking of which, that is the game that most people are focused on. Of course, Stanford, Notre Dame, another huge matchup. Ohio State is obviously very much a strong play from Vegas when you consider the home field advantage in Happy Valley, or at least the perceived home field advantage maybe being a smidge more than most places, that Ohio State's still in that 3-point range, although it seems like the line maybe is inched down a little bit as people have liked the home team.
Yeah, I really think where this line settles is going to be key, because we talk about it every week. 3 is the most important number in all of sports when you're talking about football. More games land with a 3-point win by the favorite in college and pro football than any other number in any other sport. So at 3.5 or more, I do think Penn State is tempting as the home dog. On the surface, I could see a situation here where Ohio State comes in more focused than normal, even though this is a big game, and I just talked about how teams are always focused. That wasn't the case a few years ago, and they lost outright as a 20-point road favorite. So obviously they remember that. With Urban Meyer back, this team is chomping at the bit. With that said, though, it's sometimes easier said than done to go into a place like Penn State, where the Nittany Lions have been up and down this season overall, and just turn things on. I think Penn State's a very dangerous matchup here. I think this will be a high-scoring game. I think it'll be over 70 points. And if it's a shootout back and forth, and if you are getting 3.5 with the home dog on a strong field, and it goes down to the wire, I could see this being a 3-point game either way.
And before we get to Stanford, Notre Dame, because of course, in terms of national championship implications, that seems to be as an early season game, one that is next in line. Florida, Mississippi State. So I try to keep myself honest by looking at the games, just the schedule, and then coming up with a number, and then looking at the lines to make sure that the lines aren't swaying my thoughts. I don't know if that's smart or not, but I'm looking at the lines for the first time, so I'm not going to be able to do that this week because I haven't picked the games, but that's fine. Florida at Mississippi State, just considering, but both of these teams have a feel of being a fringe top 25 team. They're not great. They're obviously, they've lost games both to Kentucky, ironically, but they're good teams. They're talented. They're going to go 8-4, 7-5, something in that range. For Mississippi State to be a full touchdown favorite seems a little heavy.
Yeah, Florida's a team that's been a little difficult to figure out. They lose that game outright to Kentucky. Now that's not looking quite as bad, though, to be honest. As a 14-point home favorite, that loss to Kentucky is not looking quite as bad now. I did have a best bet on them after that game. The one time I've used them this year was in week 3. I had a best bet laying the 3 touchdowns against Colorado State. They won by 38. Last week they played well against Tennessee, won by 24 as a 4-point road favorite. So I do agree with you, Mark. I don't think they deserve to be this big of an underdog, especially considering that Mississippi State just lost outright as a 10-point home favorite, 28-7. So both these teams have lost outright as double-digit home favorites against the same team, Kentucky. So I think they're pretty equal overall. Home field's worth maybe 3 to 4 points in this instance. So that's the case. It's 7 or more. Another very key number. You could probably make a case there is some line value with Florida.
And I also have to think that you're taking into consideration, let's say Florida lost to Kentucky by 11, I believe, 27-16. The game was 21-16 when it was basically a final. Kentucky had like a crazy when they were throwing the ball all over the place and they ran it into the end zone. Obviously, that meant, well, it didn't mean a whole lot for that particular game, but it could for a particular game in terms of deciding the outcome against the spread. But in terms of evaluating a team for the future, you could almost say Florida lost that game by 1 score, not by 2 scores.
Right. And the other thing about Florida also is I think they'll continue to get better with that coaching staff as the season goes on. So there's some upside with them as well, whereas I think Mississippi State's kind of a known quantity. I don't see a lot of changing throughout the season for them.
Man, for as many problems as USC has had against really good teams on the road, going to Arizona, I don't think is necessarily a big disadvantage from a home road standpoint. And they're only a 3-point favorite against a team that's been pretty marginal to date.
Yeah, it's funny. I played against USC back-to-back weeks with both Stanford and Texas as best bet winners for my clients. But then last Friday night, I actually decided to come back with them against Washington State. I thought that was maybe the turning point, and they won the game by 3, failed to cover as a 4-point favorite. So another game that went, was very close to the number. But I do think we have somewhat of a buy sign for USC now. They have gone 0-4 against the spread this year, despite being 2-2 straight up. But they barely missed out last week. I think they could be a play-on team here in the near future. Concerns me a bit in this spot here after the big high-profile national TV game to now lay points on the road. But Arizona's not a team I'd be trusting right now. Good offensively, decent defensively, but I do think USC has the talent edge.
Is there any truth into what I've heard from time to time, and this isn't from people that are in the know like yourself, but if you would just blindly bet on every underdog, take the points, and just bet not against the money line, but bet against the spread, that you're going to win some money?
I know long-term in the NFL, I haven't looked at it recently because it's not enough to overcome the 11-10 juice you have to lay. But I know for several decades in the NFL, like in the 90s and the 2000s, I think underdogs hit like 51.5%. But what you got to keep in mind is when you're risking 11 to win 10 with a bet, you have to hit 52.4% to break even. It's not just 50%. So yes, underdogs probably do cover slightly more in all sports because the public in general plays favorites, but it's not enough to blindly overcome the 11-10 money line juice that you have to lay. It's about 51%. You have to hit 52% to break even.
Steve, I could keep you on here all day. There's no doubt about that. I just can't get enough of this. And from hearing from someone in the know is great. Steve Merrill, Pro Sports Info. And before we let you go, Notre Dame, a 5.5-point pick. That's at least the line I'm looking at against Stanford at home. The Cardinal won this matchup in Palo Alto last year by 18 points.
Yeah, as you know, Mark, I do a lot of radio interviews and shows on Thursdays and Fridays every week during the football season. And last week, of all the shows I did, that Wake Forest Notre Dame game was a game that most of the hosts mentioned as their upset pick, the one they thought there was some value with the underdog. And I actually did not have a play on that game last week, but it caught my attention because historically I've learned over the years when a lot of people line up on an underdog, it's a red flag. Because as I mentioned, the public usually plays favorites. And that was kind of the darling upset pick last week. We all know what happened. It was an easy 56-27 blowout by Notre Dame. So now they have a bigger game against Stanford. I did have a best bet on Notre Dame in week 1 against Michigan. I haven't used them since. Stanford, I had a best bet against USC, as I mentioned, back in week 2. I am concerned with how that game played out last week against Oregon. As you mentioned, it was a back-and-forth game. They now have to travel for the second week in a row. That could somewhat take something out of them. If it doesn't, I think this is a tight game and goes down to the wire, which makes the underdog appealing, especially since Stanford has won outright each of the last 2 years. But the real key here for me is if Stanford can bring the A game again. They had USC a few weeks ago. had a big game against Oregon. I know this is a big game, but it is still a non-conference game on the road for the second straight week. It's very hard for teams to have their A game every week. Notre Dame just kind of had a little bit of an easier win last week, might be a bit fresher now.
Hopefully, Volunteer Roadshow is still online. We wish you all the best and have earlier. He was in a car accident, a really bad one, about a week ago. So we wish you all the best. Hope everything's going well. Want you to reach out and we'll talk. But Volunteer Roadshow, Steve is asking about the Old Dominion upset being, from a points perspective, bigger than App State over Michigan in 07. Is that true?
I believe they were about a 31-point underdog, but that game went down to the wire, if I'm not mistaken. It was, what, a 3 or 7 point game. It was a single-digit game. So there's two ways to look at this. Yes, Old Dominion was only a 28-point underdog, but they won by 14, so they covered by 42 points. So they actually covered by more than Appalachian State did. App State was on the road in that game. ODU was at home. But the biggest point spread underdog upset in history actually happened last year, and it was when Howard went into UNLV as over a 40-point dog in week 1 and won outright. So if you're looking at just point spread, that was almost 2 touchdowns more than what Old Dominion did. And Howard was a bad FCS team beating an FBS team. Appalachian State was a national champion FCS team at the time, beating Michigan. And Old Dominion is still a Division 1A team, beating Virginia Tech. But we're seeing it more and more, Mark. We're seeing 3-4 touchdown dogs win several times every season now. It's something we definitely did not see 10, 15 years ago.
And, of course, a couple of historic ones. Of course, the Stanford Jim Harbaugh team beating Pete Carroll and USC. I think that was 41. Then there was also, from a point spread perspective, even though it involved bad teams, Baylor getting upset by Liberty. That was in the 42 or 43 range a couple of years ago.
That was the exact same weekend last week in week 1, I believe, when UNLV lost to Howard. So
Okay.
Actually, yeah, that Baylor, the reason I remember that is because that would have been maybe the second biggest. That was probably the biggest upset of all time. And then later that night, because it was a late West Coast game, UNLV got Baylor off the hook and they got upset. So I believe they both happened last season in week 1. I know the Howard game did, but I'm pretty sure that Liberty Baylor game was last year in week 1 as well. So that tells you something right there. We go decades and all of a sudden we get 2 of the biggest upsets ever. So something has obviously changed in college football in recent years.
Steve, if you have a couple minutes, and again, it's Steve Merrill, prosportsinfo.com, and the insight is tremendous each and every Friday here at Mark Rogers TV. People are asking about, and again, to get his picks, you go to the site prosportsinfo.com. Steve giving us some unique insight here. West Virginia, Texas Tech. Again, as I mentioned off the top, this is the time of year where you get a ton of matchups that are extremely intriguing because we're just dipping into conference play and teams have not been eliminated. And there's a lot of under-the-radar matchups from a national perspective that are very intriguing. And West Virginia looked the team in the Big 12. They looked like the real deal, like a true contender last week against Kansas State, albeit a down Wildcats team. They go to Texas Tech, and Texas Tech maybe sounded the alarm that they've arrived and possibly could be a player as well. And that game's in Lubbock. And we're just, Steve, getting some questions about West Virginia and Texas Tech. I don't know if you're still with us. I think Steve is frozen up, unfortunately. And I don't know if he's recognized that. And either I'll need to shut things down, but I'll go through the live chat and wait for Steve to get back with us. So, yeah, again, Volunteer Roadshow. Again, we love seeing you back on here. It's great to see your name in the live chat. Hopefully you're still with us. Richard, good to see you. Martin, how about them Canes? Yeah, looked really good. Gave me a first win for the weekend against the spread. That was nice to see as well. Kevin Shafty, have yet to see that name on the live chat or in any of the comments. So, Kevin, and welcome to Mark Rogers TV. Maybe you've been watching for quite some time. Always love to know who you root for and how long you've been watching, Kevin. Big Guwap 509, same for you. I have yet to see your name in the live chat. So welcome to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the videos. That helps out immensely. And if you are coming across my platform for the first time, check out the videos. We bring you the best analysis, discussion, debate that you're going to find anywhere. And certainly there's some great channels out there that I fully support. So we just do it from a different angle, hardcore stuff for the hardcore, smart college football fan. Also have a line open at 860-325-3687, 860-325-3687. Maybe I'll stay on for a couple minutes, wait for Steve to realize he's having connection issues, and jump back on the line with us. Steve, you with us?
Yeah, I'm back, guys. I think that might have been internet on my end, but we're good to go.
Very good. I think we're in good shape now. I don't know if you heard the question. We had a couple on the line. If you've got a couple minutes, one I had set up as another intriguing under the radar nationally, but within the conference, very, very telling in regards to who's going to possibly contend versus who's going to fall by the wayside in West Virginia going to Lubbock to take on Texas Tech.
Yeah, what jumps out at me is that this should be a high-scoring game. Totals over 70 in this one. Both offenses very capable of putting up points. If you look at West Virginia's defense, they've been fantastic so far. They're giving up 12 points a game. But I just get a sneaking suspicion this is one of those games they're taking a step up in class, and that defense might be exposed finally. I lean towards Texas Tech in this one right now. I think recent results have created some value with the home team here that's more than capable of trading points with West Virginia.
Purdue, Nebraska, you had mentioned and did last week as well. Stay far, far away from Nebraska. Scott Frost will probably get it figured out in year 2 and beyond, but he is still trying to build a football program, and it's only been a few weeks and probably hurt by that week off in week 1 that got his team off to a bad start against a team that had already, of course, hit the field in Colorado. Purdue at Nebraska, the Boilers finally. Now, that was a shock to me. I certainly gobbled up the 7 points, but in terms of an outright play and Purdue beating Boston College after the way the Eagles have looked as an emerging Atlantic Division team versus a Purdue team that had maybe some tough luck, but still dropped 3 in a row, and Purdue explodes on BC by 17 last week. So we got these two teams together, and despite Purdue looking that good last week at home, of course, we've got a tough environment at Nebraska as a 3-point favorite, Purdue at Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting value with Nebraska going forward. The question is, do you chance that they haven't turned things around yet? I do think you'll probably make money at some point this season playing Nebraska. It might even be this week. I do think there's some value with Nebraska as a home dog now. If you look at them statistically, they haven't done much offensively. They average 19 points a game, but they're still averaging 5 yards per play against teams that allow just 4.7. So when you factor in their opponents, Nebraska's actually been above average both offensively and defensively from a yards per play perspective, which is a good indicator. It's actually the most important statistic that I use when handicapping these yards per play. Meanwhile, Purdue, I think, caught Boston College at a really good time. We talked about Kentucky now being ranked. Boston College got ranked for the first time in a while, and then making it even more difficult was that it was a non-conference game for Boston College, which made it very easy for them to let down as a rare road favorite. So I don't read too much into that Purdue win. And I think because of that and the fact Nebraska has not won, we are probably getting some value now with the Cornhuskers. But as I said, it's risky. We just don't know if they're going to turn things around, but I think they will eventually.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, bringing on the best discussion, debate, and analysis online you will find concerning college football. Steve Merrill joins us from ProSportsInfo.com. Join him there, ProSportsInfo.com. He's been doing this for a whole lot of years, going back to the mid-90s, and does it extremely well, and we enjoy the conversation each and every week. Steve, thanks for stopping by, and I will get in touch with you in just a few minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Steve. All right, everyone. I'll be back a number of times throughout the day, breaking down my predictions. Number one, you will see those. Also, travel over to SG1 Sports. I was asked to knock out a Penn State, Ohio State preview and prediction. I did that at SG1 Sports. I'll be doing a little bit of work with them as well. Of course, keep it locked in to Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. I'll have my preview and predictions out today. I will also release Stanford, Notre Dame, and another Kelly Bryant, of course, transferring from Clemson. Had a discussion with Mike McDaniel from ESPN Blacksburg about that a couple nights ago that I'm going to release very shortly. Also, a couple different angles on Ohio State, Penn State. We talked to Tim Aiden from Black Shoe Diaries on SB Nation from the Penn State perspective. Also, Steve Hellwagon on the Ohio State perspective as the Buckeyes go to Happy Valley. We will see you guys soon. Thanks for the support, and we will see you next time.